Everyone, Zeddy here again today with a brand new video. And today I wanted to discuss something that's been on my mind for a while. It's been troubling me and a lot of other content creators I see out there, especially in the wild scene. And that's basically the continued neglect or basically failed opportunity to capitalize on the wild format. So before we get into my issues and all of that, I want to just go over the history of the wild format and how it came to be and what we've seen progress in that format. So, the wild format was introduced alongside the Whisper of the Old Gods expansion in 2016, where every year the last three expansions would rotate to wild. Would continue, so you could be able to play all your cards there. Cards would get Hall of Fame to wild as well. And it would basically be a format that Blizzard did say they would continue to support, but it would be more of like a, anything can happen kind of thing in wild. It's wild, right? So that's kind of where it started, and it went from there. And, we had some wild opens to kind of celebrate the format. Every year there was like a wild open tournament where you could qualify on ladder, and it led to a lot of excitement. A lot of pro players would participate that normally would only play standard. I remember one of the wild opens, one of the more recent ones, we saw Bloody Face and Language Hacker participate and do pretty well. And I even got included in one of them. I tried to qualify, and it was really good for the format. All of a sudden, ladder finishes meant something. Early on, though, balance patches basically were non-existent for wild. They just kind of let things go, as it went along. And, one of the first major balance patch things that ever happened for wild was a preemptive nerf to Raza and patches. They were both nerfed specifically with wild in mind, that basically, they were going to rotate to wild shortly, but they didn't want them to dominate the format for years to come. Ironically, patches is in almost every pirate deck, period. And Raza, well, it has its issues, and we'll talk about it. That'll be a little bit later. But yeah, that was one of their first kind of balance patches for wild. After that, wild was basically just a dumping ground for standard. There was no real updates to the format, no real support for it. And one of the most prolific things that happened was Baku and Gen were deemed very problematic for standard and wild. They were unbalanced and, led to a lot of linear games. And instead of nerfing it or addressing them, they literally just dumped them in wild a year early. That's never happened. It never happened before. Hasn't happened since. And yeah, it was just we don't really feel like fixing these cards, so we're just going to dump them to wild where we don't care about them. And yeah, there's still very meta-defining cards. And you can argue that that's what they should have done. That wild is wild. It should be just whatever. But I feel like if something is problematic in standard, it's kind of problematic in wild. And especially when it was Baku and Gen, which are just kind of fundamentally flawed if you really look at the grand scheme of things. To have that really frustratingly consistent, boring strategy every game, at least depending on you might love odd decks, you might love even decks. Again, it's all opinion, but they obviously felt that way because they Hall of Famed it a year early. And if that's true for standard, I felt like it was true for wild. And yeah, instead of addressing it, they just sent it to wild to just basically be there forever. And that's basically the way it's been. And as time progressed, they started to take a more active look at wild balance-wise. We saw nerfs to Aviana to 10. The Echo effect could no longer go down to 0 mana. Naga Sea Witch went to 8 mana. Open the Waygate went to 8 spells. Blood Bloom 4 mana. Dark Glare to 2 mana. And some other examples as well. But overall, this year has been the most concerning for me for wild. This year in 2020 has been the most concerning. There was a good start. We saw a nerf to Dark Glare, which was wild-based. We saw a nerf to Quest Mage and Blood Bloom, and then that was it. That was very early on in the year, and that's literally been it. And the biggest, most troubling thing I've saw, or there's two things that really trouble me. First was there was no wild open this year. No wild open. It was the first time in, I think, ever there was no wild open. And the part that upset me the most was myself, I think James Corbett, some other wild content creators went on a Twitter asking, adding Blizz devs, is there going to be a wild open this year? And I remember the way I phrased mine was, we would love to know if there's going to be a wild open. Whether there is one or not, we understand, you can't maybe it's just not possible, but can you at least communicate to us whether there'll be one or not? And they didn't even have the decency to literally say anything all year. They didn't even say, you know, with the whole pandemic, or, you know, our priority is not the wild scene or wild open, they literally said nothing. They just ignored us. And that was concerning, and still is, that there was nothing for wild at all this year. The only competitive tournament that I'm aware of that we saw for wild was the one Solemn hosted. And it did pretty well. It did pretty well. Which leads me to, like, another point is, the wild scene is actually doing well, despite Blizzard doing literally nothing to promote it. If you look on YouTube, you have like Solemn, you have Raffle, two of the biggest Hearthstone content creators growth-wise, period, in all of Hearthstone, doing incredibly well. I got my start, a lot of our early content on YouTube with Hearthstone was wild-based. And over in China, if you look at the wild, like, or wild legend there in China, they arguably have more legends in wild in China than standard. And we all know how much Blizzard loves to cater to China. So it's like, why do they not do anything to take advantage of it? Why couldn't you have like a wild Grandmasters League, or just have the Wild Open? One like little tournament that would take basically nothing and help promote, you know, your format. And I guess when you take a look at like the standard Grandmasters and all that stuff going on, I guess I basically answer my own question. They don't really support competitive at all these days without, you know, the bare minimum. But it's just a real frustration that, like, there's so much opportunity here. There's so much opportunity for growth in Hearthstone, and we just don't see it. And on Twitch, it's still doing pretty well. There was more newly partnered streamers this year. Corbett, I believe, got partnered this year. Goku, Jack, and there's plenty of others. Frobro's been like on the cusp of getting partnered. There's like a lot of wild streamers that, you know, do well, but they're also not incentivized whatsoever with the competitive aspect. So a lot of them have become disinterested. I've seen a lot less of Corbett streaming. I've seen a lot less of Goku streaming. Jack has outright quit. I'll link his video below. He explained why he's basically quit wild because there's no support. And yeah, he's just doing Battlegrounds, and Awdragon was one of the best wild players ever, and he's quit permanently for Battlegrounds too. It's like, you have this format that people really care about, or really invested in. You see it again, like with Solemn and Raffle, and how well their content does, and how big it is in China, yet nothing is done. And the last main point I'll say, which again kind of reflects nothing being done, is Raza. Raza's like the elephant in the room in terms of wild. They unnerfed the card. They unnerfed Raza, when the whole purpose of Raza being nerfed in the first place, and this is in their words, was because of wild, right? Because of wild. And the second it got unnerfed, Raza Priest has been like tier 1 or meta warping and defining the entire time. The only time it wasn't the best deck or the most dominant was when Quest Mage was very popular, and then that got nerfed, and aggro got so many good tools that Quest Mage is just not that popular anymore. But Raza Priest, with like additions like Lorekeeper Polkelt, it's just broken. It's broken the format where everything is warped around Raza Priest, and this was what they were worried about. This is why they nerfed Raza, because they were afraid it would warp the entire meta. And I'm fine with them reverting nerfs on wild cards. That's fine. But when you revert a card that was nerfed for wild, it'd be like reverting Naga for some reason, or reverting the Echo effect for some reason. Literally reverting a nerf because of wild and being like, why not? And then doing nothing to address it after it's been, you know, dominating the meta and frustrating a lot of people. And I guess another part of the problem that I have with this is they actually never communicated why they took the Raza nerf away. I know there were people that were asking for it, but there was a lot of people like myself that were saying it's going to be a bad idea. And yeah, it was a bad idea. And I mean, yes, you can love your Raza Priest, you can be a fan of it, but you have to look every month on the tier list. It's the top deck. It warps everything, and it's not exactly fun to die from 30 health every single game because they play Polkelt into Anduin, into Raza, into Spawn of Shadows. And yeah, you could like nerf Spawn of Shadows. That'll whatever, but the point is, they reverted a nerf that was literally done for wild and has damaged the wild landscape, the wild meta. And 2020 has just been a disheartening, frustrating year as a wild content creator, as someone who cares about the wild format, to see how little they do to take advantage of this amazing wild community that wants it to thrive, both in North America and over in China, worldwide, wherever you want to talk about it, and the fact that they basically harmed the meta themselves by literally reverting a nerf of a card that was nerfed for the sake of Wild in the first place. So that's kind of my concerns about Wild. I do hope that Blizzard next year, if things, can hope return to some kind of normalcy, maybe they capitalize on Wild a bit more. Maybe we have the return of the Wild Open. Maybe they do adjust Raza Priest again. And, listen a little bit more to the community in that regard. Let me know in the comments below, do you think Blizzard is missing out on a golden opportunity by making Wild a more, devoted, interesting format that they could really take advantage of? Do you think Raza is fine, that it shouldn't be nerfed, that the whole deck it's fine to warp the meta? Whatever, I'm more than happy to listen to the other side of the opinion. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day. And stay salty, my friends.